The crash of the porcelain plate shattering against the wall of the three-star restaurant was the sound of a career ending. Julian Vance, known to the culinary world as the god of the Garnish and the youngest chef to ever hold 3 Michelin stars in London, stood with his chest heaving, his white chef's coat stained with a red wine reduction that looked alarmingly like blood. In front of him sat the most feared food critic in New York, wiping sauce from his lapel with a look of terrified disdain. Julian didn't just quit, he imploded, screaming that the industry was a soulless machine before storming out the back door into the rain. 6 months later, bearded, broke, and blacklisted from every high-end kitchen from Tokyo to Paris, Julian stood shivering in a line outside a dilapidated brick building in Seattle, not looking for a job, but waiting for a bowl of soup because he hadn't eaten in 2 days. He didn't know that the warm light spilling from the Harbor Light shelter wasn't just a beacon for the hungry. It was the fire that would forge him into the man he was always meant to be. The rain in Seattle was different from the rain in London. In London, it was a polite, persistent drizzle. Here, it was a heavy, soaking blanket that seeped into your bones and refused to leave. Julian pulled the collar of his thrift store jacket tighter around his neck, trying to hide his face. He was unrecognizable anyway. The sharp, clean-shaven jawline that had graced the cover of Bon Appetit was hidden under a thick, unruly beard, and his eyes, once piercing and arrogant, were now dull with exhaustion. He shuffled forward with the line of men and women, the smell of wet wool and exhaust fumes filling the air. When he finally reached the serving window, a plastic tray was shoved into his hands. On it sat a bowl of gray, watery substance that smelled vaguely of boiled cabbage and despair. "Next," a tired voice called out. Julian looked up. The woman behind the counter couldn't have been older than 30, but her eyes held the weight of a century. She had messy auburn hair, tied back with a rubber band, and wore an apron that had seen better days. Her name tag read Maya. She looked at him not with pity, but with a fierce, efficient kindness. "Bread's on the end. Take 2 pieces if you need it," she said, her voice raspy. Julian took the tray and sat at a long communal table. He stared at the soup. He picked up his spoon, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the low blood sugar. He took a sip. It was awful. It was worse than awful, it was a crime against ingredients. The vegetables were overcooked to mush, the broth was under-seasoned tap water, and there was a metallic tang that suggested the pot hadn't been scoured properly. He ate it anyway. He had to. As he scraped the bowl clean, a commotion broke out in the kitchen behind the serving line. There was a shout, a clang of metal, and then Maya came rushing out, looking frantic. "We lost the dishwasher?" she was saying into a phone pressed to her ear. "Gary, you can't do this to me. It's Tuesday. We have the family rush in an hour. I can't serve and wash." She hung up, looking defeated. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a second. Julian stood up. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the muscle memory of a kitchen in crisis. Maybe it was the fact that he had $12 to his name and nowhere to sleep. He walked up to the counter. "I can wash," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse. Maya opened her eyes, startled. She looked him up and down. "Have you worked in a kitchen before?" "A few," Julian said, looking at his boots. "Nothing fancy, just prep and wash." "Can you start now? I can pay minimum wage, cash at the end of the shift, and you get a second helping of stew." "Deal," Julian said. She led him into the back. The kitchen was a disaster zone. It wasn't dirty, but it was disorganized. The equipment was ancient. A stove with only 3 working burners, a walk-in fridge that hummed like a dying airplane, and a dish pit that was overflowing with mountains of greasy plastic trays. "I'm Maya." She tossed him a rubber apron. "Soap, rinse, sanitize. Don't slow down. We serve 300 people between 5 and 7. "I'm Jay," Julian lied, tying the apron. It felt familiar. It felt like armor. For the next 4 hours, Julian Vance, the genius who had once plated gold leaf onto scallops for royalty, scrubbed hardened grime off plastic trays. He worked with a rhythmic, terrifying efficiency. He organized the pit, creating a workflow that cleared the backlog in 40 minutes. When the rush died down, he found himself chopping carrots for the next day's mirepoix. He watched the cook, a massive, silent man named Big Mike, who looked like he could bench press a truck, dumping unwashed vegetables into a pot. Julian flinched. "If you roast the carrots first," he muttered, almost involuntarily. Big Mike turned slowly, holding a ladle like a weapon. "What did you say, Hollywood?" Julian froze. He shouldn't have spoken. "Nothing, just if you roast them with a little oil and salt before boiling, it brings out the sugar, makes the stock richer without costing extra." "We ain't got time for roastin'. We got hungry people." "It takes 20 minutes, Julian pressed, stepping into the danger zone. "You have the oven on anyway, for the bread. Put them on a sheet tray. It's free flavor." Mike looked at Maya, who was counting cash in the corner. She looked up, sensing the tension. "Let 'em try it, Mike," she said, rubbing her temples. "The soup today tasted like dishwater. If Jay thinks he can fix it with a sheet tray, let him." So Julian roasted the carrots. He also found a bag of dried thyme in the back of the pantry that everyone had ignored. He bloomed the spices in the oil. He deglazed the roasting tray with a splash of vinegar he found under the sink to lift the fond. When the soup was ready for the late shift, the smell changed. It didn't smell like boiled cabbage anymore. It smelled like food. It smelled like home. Maya walked by the pot, sniffing the air. She paused. She grabbed a spoon and tasted it. Her eyes went wide. She looked at the pot, then at Julian, who was scrubbing the floor. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "Just a dishwasher," Julian said, scrubbing a stain that probably had been there since the 90s. "Dishwashers don't know what a mirepoix is, and they certainly don't know how to balance acidity with vinegar." "I watched a lot of Cooking Channel," Julian deflected. "Are we done?" Maya studied him. She saw the way he held the knife earlier, the pinch grip, the speed, the safety. She saw the scars on his forearms, the burn tattoos of a lifer. She didn't know who he was, but she knew he was lying. "You're done. But come back tomorrow, 6 a.m. You're not washing dishes anymore. You're on prep." As Julian walked out into the rainy night, pocketing his $40, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't the pride of a Michelin star. It was quieter. It was the feeling of being useful. He found a cheap hostel a few blocks away. As he lay on the lumpy mattress, listening to the sirens outside, he realized he was looking forward to roasting onions in the morning. Over the next 3 weeks, the Harbor Light shelter transformed. It wasn't a visual change. The paint was still peeling and the linoleum was still cracked, but the soul of the place shifted. Julian, still going by Jay, had quietly usurped the kitchen. Big Mike, initially hostile, had become his most loyal lieutenant after Julian showed him how to sharpen his knife so it sliced through tomatoes instead of crushing them. Then there was Daisy, a 17-year-old runaway with pink hair and a sharp tongue, who had been volunteering for court hours. Julian taught her how to make bread, showing her how the dough should feel like a warm earlobe when it was proofed correctly. The food was the catalyst. The budget hadn't changed. They were still working with donations, dented cans, and near-expired produce. But the menu had. The mystery stew was replaced by a rich, dark vegetable bourguignon made from red wine and root vegetables. The stale bread became garlic rosemary focaccia. The powdered mashed potatoes were swapped for hand-crushed potatoes with caramelized onion butter. The line outside the shelter grew. People weren't just coming to survive. They were coming to eat. One rainy Tuesday, Maya found Julian in the pantry, organizing the spice rack by flavor profile. "We're over budget on olive oil," she said, leaning against the door frame. She looked tired, but less frantic than before. There was color in her cheeks. "I know, but I saved 20% on meat by bulking the chili with lentils and roasted eggplant. We're actually under budget for the week." Maya chuckled, shaking her head. "You're a wizard, Jay. Seriously. The residents, they're happier. The fights in the dining hall have dropped by half. It turns out when people aren't eating slop, they feel like human beings."
Julian paused, a jar of cumin in his hand. That's the point, isn't it? It is, she said softly. She stepped into the small pantry. The space was tight. She smelled like rain and vanilla. You still haven't told me where you learned to cook like this. I tried to Google Jay the chef, but nothing came up. I told you I'm nobody, Julian said, his heart rate spiking. He turned to face her. They were inches apart. Nobody cooks a bechamel sauce for mac and cheese at a homeless shelter, she whispered, looking up at him. You're hiding something. Are you in trouble? With the law? No, Julian said. I burned out. I lost myself. Being here, it's helping me find the ground again. Maya reached out, her hand hesitating before resting on his forearm. The contact sent a jolt through him that was stronger than any caffeine. Well, whatever you're running from, I'm glad you ran here. You're saving us, Jay. You saved me, he murmured, almost too quiet to hear. The moment was broken by the sound of the front door slamming open. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Maya's face fell. Oh no, he's early. Who? Counselor Sterling and the property developer. Julian followed her out to the dining hall. Standing there was a slick man in a tailored suit, Mr. Sterling, and a woman with a tablet who looked at the building like she was already measuring it for a wrecking ball. Maya, Sterling boomed, a fake smile plastered on his face. Just a routine inspection, and this is Miss Thorne from Apex Development. We have a lease, Sterling, Maya said, her voice trembling slightly. Actually, Miss Thorne said, tapping her tablet, there's a clause, subsection 4. If the facility fails a health inspection or fails to meet operating budget for 2 consecutive quarters, the city can reclaim the property for better usage, condos specifically. We're making the budget, Maya argued. Barely, but we are. And the health inspection? Thorne raised her eyebrow, looking at the cracked ceiling. This place is a hazard. The kitchen is spotless, Julian spoke up, stepping out from the back. He was wearing his stained apron, but he stood with the posture of a head chef addressing the floor. Sterling looked at him with disdain. And who's this, the janitor? The head chef, Maya said firmly. Chef? Toon laughed. It's a soup kitchen, dear. You don't have a chef. You have a can opener. Julian felt the old rage bubbling up, the beast of Bordeaux wanting to scream. But he looked at Maya, at her defiant chin and shaking hands. He swallowed the anger. We serve 300 meals a day, nutritiously balanced, safely prepared, and seasoned with respect. Would you like to try the lentil ragu? We're not here to eat, Sterling sneered. We're here to notify you the health inspector is coming on Friday. If there is one violation, one roach, one temperature variance, we shut you down. And Apex takes the land. They turned and left, leaving a vacuum of silence in the hall. Maya slumped onto a bench, burying her face in her hands. We can't pass. The ventilation hood is held together with duct tape. The fridge seals are cracked. They'll find something. They always do when they want to sell. Julian sat beside her. He looked around the room at the mismatched tables, the residents finishing their meals, the warmth of the place. He realized he cared about this crumbling building more than he ever cared about his sleek, stainless steel empire in London. We'll fix it, Julian said. We have 3 days, Jay. We have no money. We don't need money, Julian said, his mind racing. We need labor. And we need to make sure that when that inspector comes, he's not just inspecting a shelter. He's inspecting the best restaurant in the city. What are you talking about? Trust me, Julian said, standing up. Get Big Mike, get Daisy. We're going to scrub this place until it shines. And I'm going to make a menu that will make it impossible for them to shut us down without a public riot. Jay, it's just food, Maya said hopelessly. Julian smiled, a real smile this time. Maya, food is never just food. It's leverage.
The next 3 days were a blur of sleepless exertion. Julian didn't just clean, he drilled the staff.
He taught Big Mike how to degrease the ventilation hood using a chemical mixture he remembered from culinary school. He taught Daisy how to organize the dry storage with military precision. They scoured the grout with toothbrushes. They patched the linoleum. But the real work was on the stove. Julian decided to go all in. If they were going down, they were going down swinging. He called in a few anonymous favors from local suppliers, people he had known in his past life who didn't know who was calling, just that a friend of a friend needed high-quality produce for charity. Friday arrived. The shelter gleamed. The smell of fresh baking bread masked the scent of old damp. The health inspector arrived at noon. He was a sour-faced man named Mr. Henderson, accompanied by Counselor Sterling, who looked eager to slap a padlock on the door. As Henderson moved through the kitchen, checking temperatures with a laser thermometer, Julian stood at his station, chopping herbs. He was nervous, more nervous than he had been for his third Michelin star review. "Fridge temp is 38 degrees, Henderson mumbled. "Acceptable." He ran a finger over the top of the doorframe. No dust. He checked the seals, repaired with food-safe silicone. "The menu?" Henderson said, looking at the chalkboard. "Braised short rib with polenta? In a shelter?" "Donated ribs," Julian said quickly. "Slow cooked for 12 hours to tenderize." "May I?" Henderson asked. Julian ladled the small portion into a bowl. Henderson took a bite. He chewed slowly. His eyebrows shot up. He took another bite. This is excellent." Sterling looked furious. "Check the grease trap! Check the drains!" "The drains are clear," Henderson said, closing his notebook. "Actually, this is the cleanest kitchen I've seen in the district this month. I have no grounds to cite them." Maya let out a sob of relief, clutching Daisy's hand. Sterling turned purple. "This is ridiculous. I want a reinspection next week." "You can have one," a voice called from the dining area. Everyone turned. Standing there was a woman with a camera and a press pass. It was Clara Vance, no relation, but a notorious food blogger in the city. And behind her were two other reporters. "Who called the press?" Sterling demanded. "I did," Clara said, stepping forward. She wasn't looking at Sterling. She was looking at Julian. Julian pulled his cap down, trying to turn away. Clara walked right up to the serving window. She squinted at him. Then she gasped. "Oh my God," she said, raising her camera. "It is him." "Him who?" Maya asked, stepping between them. "Leave him alone." "You don't know?" Clara laughed, snapping a photo. "Maya, your dishwasher is Julian Vance, the beast of Bordeaux, the guy who threw a plate at Henri Gaultier, the guy who famously said in GQ magazine that charity work is where chefs go to die." The room went silent. The flash of the camera seemed to blind everyone. Maya turned slowly to look at Julian. Her face was pale. "Julian Vance?" Julian took off his cap. There was no point hiding anymore. He ran a hand through his messy hair. "Maya, I can explain." "The charity is for failures guy?" she whispered. "That was you?" "I was a different person then. I was an arrogant prick. I didn't know." "So what is this?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. "A penance project? A PR stunt to rehabilitate your image? Are we just props for your comeback story?" "No," Julian shouted. "I love this place. I love the work." "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling shouted, seizing the moment, "you see, even the staff are frauds. A disgraced violent chef hiding out in a city facility? This is a liability nightmare. Mr. Henderson, surely employing a man with a history of workplace violence is a violation of the safety code?" Henderson looked uncomfortable. Technically, if he wasn't background checked. He wasn't, Maya said, her voice cold. She looked at Julian with a mixture of heartbreak and betrayal. You lied to me, she said, her voice breaking. Get out. Julian, please. Get out, she screamed, before I call the police. Julian looked at the kitchen he had built. He looked at Big Mike, who was staring at his feet. He looked at Daisy, who looked confused. And he looked at Maya, the woman who had given him a piece of bread when he was starving. He untied his apron, folded it neatly on the counter, and walked out the back door, past the smiling Counselor Sterling. Within an hour, the story was everywhere. Disgraced chef hiding in a homeless shelter. The internet mocked him. But worst of all, Apex Development announced that due to security concerns regarding unstable staff, they were petitioning for an emergency eviction of the shelter. Julian sat on a park bench in the rain, watching the news on his cracked phone screen. He had fixed the soup, but he had broken the shelter.
2 days later, Julian sat in a plush velvet chair in a hotel suite. Across from him was his old agent, Marcus. "Julian, baby, it's genius," Marcus was saying, pacing the room. "The narrative arc, the fallen king among the paupers. I have the Food Network on line 1. They want a reality show, The Redemption Kitchen. We open a new restaurant in downtown Seattle, high-end, but with a rustic vibe. You're back, Julian. You're bigger than LaFour." Julian looked at the contract on the table. It was a check for $500,000, enough to never worry about rain again. "And the shelter?" Julian asked. "Who cares?" Marcus waved a hand. "They're getting evicted anyway. Sterling won. Apex is bulldozing it next month. But hey, we can do a charity dinner once a year. Good tax write-off." Julian felt the bile rise in his throat. He remembered the taste of the watery cabbage soup. He remembered Daisy's smile when she baked her first perfect loaf. He remembered Maya's hand on his arm. He stood up. "No," Julian said. "No?" Marcus stopped pacing. "Julian, you're broke. You're living in a hostel." "I'm not taking the restaurant," Julian said, grabbing his coat, "but I am going to use the press." He walked out, leaving the contract unsigned. He went straight to the shelter. It was locked. A "closed for eviction" sign was taped to the door. He pounded on the glass. Big Mike opened it. He looked miserable. "She don't want to see you, boss." "I know," Julian said, "but she needs to. Move, Mike." He pushed past him and found Maya in the office, packing boxes. She looked up, her eyes red. "I told you to leave," she said. "Sterling is evicting you because the shelter has no funds to fight the legal battle," Julian said, breathless. "He's buying the land for pennies because it's distressed." "I know the details, Julian. Go away." "I can save it," Julian said. "How? With your magic risotto?" "Yes," Julian said. "I have every food critic, blogger, and rich foodie in the Northwest watching me right now. They want a show? I'll give them a show." He slammed his hand on the desk. "We host a gala. Here. Tomorrow night. $5,000 a plate. I cook. We invite the press. We raise enough money in one night to buy the building outright from the city before Apex can sign the deed." Maya stared at him. "You're crazy. We have plastic tables and dented cans. I'll call my suppliers. I'll get the Wagyu, the truffles, the vintage wine. I'll get it on credit. If we pull this off, we pay them back. If we don't, I go to jail for fraud." "Why?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you do this for us? You can go back to your stars." "Because," Julian said, his voice cracking, "I chased those stars for 10 years, and I was miserable. I peeled potatoes with you for 3 weeks, and I was happy. You're not a prop, Maya. You're the point." She looked at him for a long, agonizing silence. Then she wiped her face. "Big Mike can't wait tables," she sniffed. "He scares people." "We'll put him in a vest," Julian smiled.
He'll be fine. The next 24 hours were the hardest of Julian's life. He didn't sleep. He turned the dilapidated dining hall into a rustic, chic venue, using candles to hide the cracks in the walls. He bullied his old suppliers into sending thousands of dollars of inventory. The night of the gala, the street was lined with limousines. The same people who had sneered at Julian in London were now fighting to get into the exclusive pop-up at the homeless shelter. Julian was in the kitchen. It was hot, loud, and chaotic. But this time his line cooks weren't French-trained sous chefs. They were Big Mike, Daisy, and a few other residents. "Service!" Julian shouted. "Daisy, that garnish needs to be tighter. Mike, watch the sear." "Yes, chef," they shouted back in unison. The food went out. It was spectacular. A deconstructed soup kitchen stew made with braised short rib and truffle foam. Trash can nachos made with homemade masa crisps and caviar. It was irony plated with genius. In the dining room, Maya worked the floor. She was charming, fierce, and persuasive. She told the story of the shelter not as a sad place, but as a place of hope. At the end of the night, Julian walked out into the dining room. The applause was deafening. He took the microphone. "Thank you," he said, sweating and stained. "Tonight was a great meal, but tomorrow, 300 people will stand in line at that door for soup. If you like the food tonight, you're not paying for the steak, you're paying for the soup. The price of admission is the deed to this building." He looked at Counselor Sterling, who was sitting in the back, looking uncomfortable. "We have raised," Maya stepped up, holding a tablet, her hands shaking, $450,000. The room gasped. "Which is," Maya continued, looking straight at Sterling, $50,000 more than the Apex offer. We are exercising our right to purchase the property under the tenant clause." The room erupted. Sterling stormed out. Julian didn't stay for the champagne. He went to the back alley to get some air. He leaned against the dumpster, exhausted. The door opened, and Maya stepped out. She was wearing a borrowed evening gown, but she had her apron over it. "You did it," she said. "We did it," Julian corrected. She walked over to him. "So, what now? Paris? New York?" "I was thinking," Julian said, looking at the rain, "the breakfast shift needs help. Big Mike still burns the toast." Maya smiled, tears streaming down her face. She reached out and took his hand, his rough, scarred chef's hand. "You're hired," she whispered, "but no minimum wage this time." "I'll take payment in coffee," Julian said. She leaned in and kissed him. It tasted of rain, victory, and a little bit of truffle oil. 6 months later. The sign above the door had changed. It now read, "The Community Table, a Shelter and Kitchen." Inside, the walls were painted a warm yellow. The kitchen had new appliances, donated by a restaurant supply company that wanted the good PR. Julian stood at the pass, checking a tray of lasagna. It wasn't Michelin food. It was better. It was hearty, hot, and made with love. "Order up," he called. Daisy, now enrolled in a culinary arts program at the community college, grabbed the tray. "Thanks, chef." Maya walked into the kitchen with a clipboard. She looked stressed, but happy. "We have a donation of 50 pounds of kale," she sighed. "What do we do with 50 pounds of kale?" "Kale chips," Julian said instantly, "with nutritional yeast and sea salt. The kids love them." "You're a genius," she said, pecking him on the cheek as she passed. Julian watched her go. He looked around his kitchen. He didn't have any stars on the wall. He didn't have his name in lights. But as he watched a homeless veteran sit down to a plate of fresh hot lasagna and close his eyes in pure bliss, Julian Vance knew he had finally cooked the perfect meal. He picked up his knife, grabbed a bunch of kale, and got to work.